Hi everyone, welcome to Kate Knits Slowly. My name is Kate and I am a knitter based out of Canada. And this is my first knitting podcast episode. I am planning to follow the standard format with knitting podcasts of finished objects, followed by works in progress, followed by any acquisitions or planning for the future. I also do some sewing from time to time, so that might be an occasional section at the end. Today, I thought that I would deviate just slightly from that structure to start by introducing myself. So for an introduction, I thought that I would share kind of my knitting origin story. I learned how to knit as a kid. My grandmother taught me, I think like a lot of people. I think it was just like scarves and hats at the time. I still remember the kind of yarn that my grandma taught me with. I can't even describe it, but if I can find a picture, I'll put that up somewhere. It was not the easiest yarn to work with. It was like the kind of yarn that you would buy for a kid if you were trying to like make it interesting for them. So that was my introduction to knitting. I was in my high school knitting club, you know, like all of the cool kids are. But again, it was all like hats and scarves. And I was on Ravelry at the time, very, very early days of Ravelry, because this would have been like 2010-ish. But yeah, I think it never fully occurred to me. Obviously, I knew that you could knit a sweater, but I don't think that I realized that you could knit your own clothing in a way that suits your wardrobe and matches your personal style until maybe last year. And that might sound a little bit silly, but it really was through discovering knitting podcasts in this type of format that I was able to see people plan their makes and have it fit into their personal style, or even more specifically, develop your personal style through knitting, really. So that was about a year ago that I rediscovered knitting. I really picked up the needles again to like give my hands something to do to deal with anxiety. That was my first idea. And I brought with me the first thing that I made last year, which was just with some like acrylic yarn that my mom had lying around. I don't even know what this pattern is. I think I probably found a free tutorial on YouTube, but it's literally just a stockinette triangle. What I find funny about this, one of the reasons it looks a mess right now is that it is acrylic. These days it's mostly used for my dog to sleep on. She really loves it. But what I find interesting about this, my grandma taught me how to knit English style when I was a kid. And that's how I started this, working from one end to the other. And you can see about halfway through, I got bored of that. Or I decided I wasn't enjoying it. It didn't feel very efficient to me. So I looked up on YouTube how to knit continental style. And you can see where the atrocious rowing out starts on this scarf. And that is where I was teaching myself to knit continental. And I also think I didn't know how to switch skeins of yarn. So there's some ugly knots that have been tied in this, but this was a great way to relearn. And what was really great about this time last autumn was that about a month after making this, and at that point I was in deep. I was watching all of the knitting podcasts on YouTube. I had made some hats, some scarves. I was lucky enough to get a work trip to Sweden. And I also booked a weekend in Oslo while I was over there. And I was just so fortunate because I started watching these knitting podcasts basically as if I was studying for this trip. I was taking notes of all of the different yarns I was interested in while I was there, patterns that I had never made a garment at this point. Like, this was my skill level going into that trip. I had never made a garment. I was working on a hood, and if I can find a picture, I'll share a picture of me wearing this hood that I had made myself in Oslo. And I was just so proud of that. But I'd never made a sweater, and yet I was in Norway and Sweden yarn shopping for sweaters, quite ambitiously. And I was wearing this scarf and the hood that I can hopefully show you. So that's kind of my knitting origin story, because by the time I got back from that trip, I was hooked. I had a suitcase full of yarn, and yeah, I was in deep. Okay, let's start with what I'm wearing. If you see me looking down, I do have a notebook here. I did take some little notes so that this is hopefully a little bit organized. It's actually quite warm here for Canada in end of September, beginning of October. For context, I live in a climate where as a kid, we would often have to, or always have to wear parkas on top of our Halloween costumes. So to be sleeveless at this time of year is fascinating, but that's why I'm wearing a vest. This is kind of a go-to outfit formula for me. I don't know about anyone else, but whenever I put on a vest, all I can think about is the girls from the Two Pearls in a Pod podcast saying the core is warm, but the arms are free. And that's exactly what it is. So this is the Bitsel Moon vest, which is a pattern by Sedna Yang. She is a Korean designer, and it says on the pattern for this that the geometric designs in the cable pattern are inspired by traditional Korean design elements. I don't know enough to speak to the specifics of that, but I do find that this is a very unique pattern in comparison to a lot of the other cable patterns that we more commonly see. And that's what really drew me to it. I found that this pattern was so perfectly detailed. I don't really know how to explain it, but I sometimes there are patterns that contain too much information. Sometimes there are patterns that don't contain enough information. And this one was perfect. Everything is charted, so you can just have the chart page with you once you've figured out all the shaping. There's diagrams, there's schematics, there's really detailed measurements of the finished objects, so there's like no guesswork in choosing the size. I can't speak more highly of the pattern. It was fantastic. The pattern does come in 8 sizes. I don't remember what size I knit. I did not take very good notes for this one. I think this was kind of an impulsive cast on. I do know that I used Cascade 220 for this in the color Natural. I don't know how it's coming up on camera, but this is kind of a yellowish off-white color. Like, it's not yellow, but leaning yellow. I was a little bit concerned about that, to be honest. I wasn't sure it would suit me, but I think it's fine. My only challenge with it is that it doesn't look good with white. So like white t-shirt underneath it, it's sometimes a challenge to style. So the construction of this piece starts with the back yoke, and it does have some short row shaping to get a really nice slant to the shoulders. And that short row shaping does happen with the cables. But I honestly don't remember that being a challenge at all, because it's all charted, so it's very clear what stitches you turn on. Yeah, after that you do the 2 front panels separately, and then join in the round under the arms and for the V-neck. I was a little bit nervous about that, to be honest, because I'm not a V-neck person. I usually go with a crew neck, but my intent with this one was to keep the V-neck fairly high. I think I might maybe even added a couple of rows to the ribbing here, and then to wear it with a crew neck exactly like this. And this is very comfortable to me. I also love that it's got these wide shoulders that are almost like a cap sleeve. I just really love the fit. And now that I've had this with me for like a couple of months now, I honestly think that this is my favorite thing that I've made so far. So this felt appropriate to wear today. Okay, so with that, let's go into finished objects. Now, normally you would do finished objects since your last episode. Since this is episode 1 for me, I'm going to do my last 3 finished objects, and I think that will give you a good idea of what I've been working on lately. These are not in chronological order, though. I'm just going to grab the closest one to me, which is this. And this is actually my most recent finished object. This is the Everyday Round Vest, or Everyday Round Neck Vest, by Noriko Ishikawa. Now, this is the second pattern by Noriko Ishikawa I've ever made. I also made the all-season vest, which I don't know if this is official, but that one seems to be like the V-neck version of this one. And that was my first ever garment. So I made that, I think, in January of last year. When I got back from that Scandinavia trip, I had picked up some Isair tweed and their mohair, which was like, I know that's very fancy for a first garment. Again, I was very lucky to go on this trip. So I made the all-season vest, and I knew right away I wanted a round neck version, and I was planning to modify that pattern. But then this one came out and I thought, perfect, I don't actually want to think that much. This will work. So this is the Everyday Round Vest, and the reason I keep gravitating towards these Noriko Ishikawa patterns is a lot like what I was saying about the Sedna Yang one from before. They are so detailed, but not in an over-explaining way. This one has 10 sizes, I believe, and I'm knitting, or I knit size 3 in the cropped view. There's both cropped and standard. And the way the construction works is to cast on in a cable cast on, which was new to me, but I thought was so worth it because it gives from one shoulder to the other, including the back neck, such a nice like structured weight to it. Then there's short rows to shape the shoulders, sort of like what I was explaining with this vest. And then more short rows to shape the front. And it doesn't end there, which is why I love this pattern, because with such a basic vest like this, I feel like it's rare to see such attention to detail, at least in my very limited experience. The other attention to detail here is that they're shaping under the arms. So there's some decreases under the arms to give it just this really nice shape. Now, the other interesting thing about this, I'll post it, or I'll put a video up here of the blocking process. Oh, I didn't say what yarn this is. I picked this up at a local fiber festival recently. It was my first fiber festival, and the yarn is from a local to me dyer called the Lab Fibres in their Everyday DK in the color Shaken and Stirred. So it is a superwash merino, and you can see in the video how much it grew. And I was expecting it to grow because I haven't worked with a lot of superwash, but I did know what to expect. Someone commented on my Instagram something like, I would never have cast off when you did, but it worked out perfectly. That is correct, and I would love to say that I was a genius and saw it coming. In reality, I wasn't playing yarn chicken, but I was playing like dye lot chicken, if that makes sense. I don't know how well it'll show up on camera, but this is the back yoke. I basically had 3 skeins, and 2 of them were in the same dye lot. 1 of them was in a different dye lot. And actually, I think the best way to show you this is that my swatch is in the one that was like an odd man out. So if you can see the difference between the majority of the finished object and that one off dye lot. And I do want to say the dye lot was not the fault of the yarn dyer. This was fantastic yarn. Her colorways are beautiful. I knew when I was buying it that it was the last 3 skeins. One was a different dye lot, and I would have to manage that. And it worked out fine. I was just managing it in a way that that one skein would only show up on the back yoke. And I did manage that, but that is why I cast off at such a cropped length, so that I wouldn't have to go back to that one skein again. Okay, for my next finished object, this is kind of the big one. This was, I don't remember if I finished this at the very end of August or the very beginning of September, but my goal when making this was to have it ready for September 1st because I had this vision at the end of summer of like the first time there is a chill in the air this year, I want to put on this big cozy sweater. And I did manage that because it is still quite warm here. But this is the waffle loop sweater, which is a pattern by Other Loops. And I knit this in size 2 in Cascade 220 in the color navy. And I want to say right off the bat, the inspiration for this pattern and specifically my color choice were inspired by Andolini Knits, who's one of my favorite podcasts on YouTube. And as soon as I saw her knit this in navy, it kind of started this obsession with me of like dark cables, because obviously I love a light cable too, and good reason that you would want to see the stitch detail and everything. But the more I think about it, for a pattern like this, where it's a lot of texture, but it's really the same texture all over. There are a couple of different cables here, but for the most part, it's like a consistent texture. You don't really need to see every detail. You just kind of need to see that the texture is there. Whereas with like this, for example, there's so many different cable motifs in this that you kind of do want to like move your eye across the whole thing and check out what all of the different motifs look like. But I love the idea with something like this of having a color where I know the cables are there, and if the light hits it the right way, it looks beautiful. But I'm not like trying to show off the cables, if that makes sense. I'll put up another example. I saw someone on Instagram recently who was doing like black cables, and I thought that that was just so cool. The other thing that I want to say about this project, and especially since we're talking about Andolini Knits, is that her suggestions for ribbing techniques are just life-changing. And I don't even remember what video she mentioned this in because she just mentioned it offhand, but my ribbing on this project looks so good. But basically what she suggested was going down an extra needle size. So like if it tells you to go down to 4 millimeters for the cuff, go down to 3.5 millimeters. And in order to deal with it like not cinching in, you then add extra stitches every like, I think like 7 stitches or so, you just add another. And I thought, that doesn't seem very specific. There's no way that would work. But it does, and it looks really, really good. I think that in this case, that is also down to the yarn. This Cascade 220, same yarn, by the way, from this vest and this sweater. It has such good stitch definition, and it makes me really glad that I did not use any kind of mohair or mohair alternative with either of these, because you can see the stitches so clearly. While we're on a bit of a sidebar about ribbing, some other things that I do to keep the ribbing neat: tubular bind-offs, basically always, so not just the Italian sewn bind-off, but doing those setup rows with the double knitting, and also combination knitting. That's actually something I forgot to mention with this vest. For some reason, I decided this would be a good project to teach myself combination knitting and cabling without a cable needle, which was a terrible idea. But I do really like both of those techniques. The combination knitting for ribbing in particular, hopefully you can see the ribbing nicely, has been really, really helpful to me. And cabling without a cable needle, for anything that's like a 2x2 cable or less, which there's a lot of in the waffle loop, the cabling without a cable needle was so worth struggling through learning. One thing I wanted to mention about the yarn, actually 2 things. The color does pick up a lot of like dust. I just thought that that was noteworthy because whenever I pick a color like this, there's part of me that thinks, oh, that's going to be messy. I'm going to spill things on it. And it's actually not really an issue. Yet this, every little piece of dog hair or dust or anything is so visible. So I feel like that's just a note to self that I need to keep in mind with darker colors. The other thing is pilling. Very minimal. You might be able to see a little bit on like the cuffs and hem, but I have been wearing this so much this month. This has basically become like a hoodie type thing in my wardrobe. Like anytime it gets a little bit cold, I wake up in the morning and the house isn't warm yet, I throw this on. And last thing I wanted to say about this, I think, is modifications. I made 2 small modifications. The neck is maybe half the length of what the pattern suggests. I just don't like the way turtlenecks look on me. I actually had this maybe half an inch longer, tried it on, and immediately ripped it out. It wasn't even a full turtleneck, and I couldn't. And then the sleeves, which is actually of note because I like long sleeves. I like them to go down to like my thumb, halfway down my thumb maybe. So I usually knit sleeves longer than the pattern suggests. But this waffle texture grows so much that I actually had to make the sleeves quite a bit shorter. And actually, one interesting note about the sleeves, because I didn't talk much about the construction of this sweater, it is overall just a very basic drop shoulder construction. Couple of little differences. After increasing for the back yoke drop shoulder part of it, you can see that there's this little bit of ribbing that runs all the way down the back yoke. And then there's also some decreases that happen right after the final increases for the back yoke. I'm not sure you'll be able to see very well, but it basically means that the drop shoulder goes out really wide before going back in a little bit. So it kind of just makes it more like dramatically oversized in the shoulders. And then with the sleeves, I think Other Loops does this a lot and makes the sleeve decreases like part of the pattern design rather than trying to hide them on the underarm. And that's what's done here. The decreases are actually done on the top side of the sleeve rather than the bottom, which just makes for a really interesting shape. Okay, final finished object for today is socks. These are the Yukidoke socks by Yuka. And this is a very detailed cable knit pattern. You can see that the cables are done with twisted knit stitches that make them like really tight and defined. And there's some bobbles as well. So just really amazing, intricate pattern. There are a few different sizes to choose from. I did kind of a hybrid between a couple of different sizes, and you can kind of see here. This is only my second pair of socks, by the way, so don't take anything I say as a knitting expert, as a sock expert. And actually, if you are a sock knitter and have any advice for me, I would be so happy to hear it in the comments. My first pair of socks, I'll insert a picture, were the Petal Drop socks by Florence Miller. And Florence is actually a huge fan of Yuka's patterns, which I learned from her podcast. So I went to these next. My issue has been that the Petal Drop socks were too big, which wasn't surprising because they are lace, so they really grew. So for the Yukidoke socks, I picked a size with fewer stitches, but because they're cables rather than lace, these are a little too small. So I now have 2 pairs of socks. They both fit, but one is a little big, one is a little small. And I guess what confuses me at the moment with sock knitting is that I've heard people talk about how they have like a perfect magic number of stitches that they cast on for their socks. And I feel like I could find that for myself, but with vanilla socks, right? I'm wondering what people do when they're knitting textures like this. Do they know in their mind how many more or less stitches they should do depending on how much cable, how much lace there is? I guess I'm not too worried about it because both of these pairs of socks still fit. and I'm really happy with the finished product here. These are toe up, by the way, and I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, but I think I prefer toe up socks. I just found them a lot easier to try on as I was knitting. So you cast on with a Turkish cast on, then do a lot of increases. And what I did was start with the biggest size, and then to try to avoid the problem that I had with the pedal drop socks, what I did around here, and you can probably see, is I decreased, and for this section did a smaller size. And I think I kept doing that smaller size all the way up. So that kind of hybrid method I think worked well, because now around the arch it does fit quite well, but maybe I should have sized up again for the heel. I don't know. If any sock knitters have any advice for me, I would be happy to hear it. I didn't mention the yarn. The yarn for this was the Pro Lana Sockenwolle Uni 4-ply in the color mouse gray. Very exciting mouse gray. It actually is a little bit more exciting in person. Depending on the light, this is quite a purplish gray, but you might think I'm crazy and just say it's gray. This is a 75% wool and 25% polyamide. I'm not very experienced with sock yarns, as I said, but I will say this is maybe not my favorite sock yarn that I've used. I don't know if you can see, but it's almost like fuzzy, and to me the fuzziness is the plasticky part, and I haven't had at least a lot of that experience with the couple of other sock yarns that I've used. So again, sock knitters, any advice, any recommendations, I would be happy to hear it, but I will be doing more yucca patterns. And actually I am doing another yucca pattern. We'll actually go to that next. Let's go to works in progress. Okay, works in progress. By the way, I know that people talk about project bags a lot. This is a Delphonics case, which is just like a stationery case that I have, and I found it's great for travel because it's got all these pockets that you can throw different notions into. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you might notice that I have not worked on this in a couple weeks. As we're starting works in progress, I will say I don't knit monogamously, but I would say that I'm as close to it as you can be, if that makes sense. I have a couple of projects on the go at a time. Ideally, it's like one complicated one stockinette one, something like that. You'll see my other whip in a second, but because I have 2 textured knits at the moment, I really have been just like hyper fixating on one at a time. And for the past few weeks, it has not been this one. But this is the Berries and Bird Tracks sock, which is another yucca pattern. And it is from the 52 Weeks of Socks book by Lana, volume 2. And I actually don't have the book to show you anymore because I borrowed it from the library. And if anybody watching this is not using their library for knitting resources, please go see what your library has. I went to the library and grabbed 52 Weeks of Socks and the Knitting for Olive book. And like, I didn't even put a hold on them. They were just there and I took them. It was amazing. So Berries and Bird Tracks sock, again, similarly, just incredibly intricate cable pattern, several size options, just like the last yucca one, and incredibly enjoyable. It's just become this pattern where like I can keep the little chart in front of me, and that's kind of all I need to get through it. I'm past the heel. Both of these socks have been toe up, as you can see with this one. Heel flap and gusset. And yeah, I guess I don't have a ton to say about this one. I'm trying the same thing as the last one, where I kind of go between a couple different sizes. If any sock knitters in the comments want to tell me that's a terrible idea, it might be too late for this one, but I would love to hear your advice. And I am using the Chow Gu red lace cables. I think I'm a convert to these. I was kind of surprised by that because for my like garment knitting, I tend to prefer wooden needles. But for socks, I've had no issue with the metal ones. The yarn for this is West Yorkshire Spinners, Signature 4-ply, and this is in the color Cornflower. And it's just this very pretty blue leaning on purple color. And I really like the feel of it. It's got some BFL content in it. And yeah, again, not an expert in sock yarn, but I really like this one. Okay, so I will plan to get back to that one soon, but I think I need to finish my other cable project first, which is what I'll show you next. Okay, this project has been upgraded to the yarn bowl, which is where my projects go when they get too big for any of my project bags. This is the Lauder cardigan by Rebecca Clow, and this is my swatch for it. I'm going to show you the swatch now because I am very much losing yarn chicken, and there's a good chance that this swatch is going to have to come apart to become part of the project quite soon. So this is actually in kind of an awkward state to show you. I have finished the body, finished the hem, finished one arm, and I have finished a button band. I'm kind of going about this very chaotically, but it is mostly due to my yarn chicken issues, which are issues of my own making, I will say. When I bought this yarn, which by the way, I am using pure Gynt. This is my first time using pure Gynt, and I really like it. The stitch definition has been great. I think it has a lot in common with the Cascade 220 that I really like, but slightly less heavy. And I don't remember exactly what the color is called, but I believe it's like brown mix or brown melange. I will put it in the description though. But when I bought this yarn, I was planning to do a different cardigan. A lot of my projects I plan based on like an inspiration concept. Like I'll see a picture on Pinterest and think, ooh, I want a cardigan in that color. And I don't necessarily try to go for an exact dupe, but I do try to find something that like matches the same vibe, if that makes sense. So for this cardigan, what I had in mind was this Cezanne cardigan that I saw on Pinterest. And I originally had a different knitting pattern in mind for it. And then I decided that I wanted something with more cables, less moss stitch. And the Lauder definitely fit the bill for more cables. Oh my goodness, I can't even tell you. Well, actually I can. After I joined Under the Arms, I decided to count in the chart how many cable crosses I had done. And it was 700 then. I think it was something like 1,000 when I was done the body, and that doesn't even include the sleeves. So it's so much cabling, but it looks gorgeous, and I'm so excited for it to block. The way this is constructed is starting with the back yoke, and when the increases are done on the back yoke, there's this cable detail that runs down the side, which is just such a really, really gorgeous detail. And then similarly on the front, there's one of those skinnier cables that kind of frames the neck. Now, I have made a couple of modifications to this. First of all, I'm knitting off gauge, so I'm doing a size 4, but expecting it to be a little bit smaller than that. I also modified the sleeve decreases because I was worried about having a tight sleeve. I just don't like to have tight sleeves around my arms. So I modified that, hoping they'll be a bit baggier. That is also contributing to the yarn chicken. And then, last modification I made, which was very impulsive, I finished the hem recently one night, and then I was scrolling on Instagram, and if I can find a picture, I'll show it. I saw a completely different cardigan that had a double knit button band, and I just thought, I want that. And I've never done a double knit button band before, so the next morning I woke up and I found a tutorial on YouTube, and now I have a double knit button band and I love it. Again, contributing to the yarn chicken. This is completely my own fault, but I think that button band looks great. What I sometimes find with cable patterns that I do, the ribbing plus the cables can be like too much texture for me, especially if the ribbing isn't like super neat. I just find it's very like noticeable. Whereas the double knit looks almost like stockinette. It basically is stockinette, right? So I really like the look of that for this. I think it looks really clean. So all I have left to do is the other button band, the collar, and the other sleeve. I definitely have enough yarn for the other sleeve and the other button band. The collar is going to be iffy. I wasn't worried about this until Canada Post went on strike, and now I'm a little worried about how I can get more yarn, but I think we'll figure it out. So other things I wanted to mention about this project, it's really a great pattern. It's one of Rebecca's, I don't know if I mentioned it first. This is by Rebecca by the Crayabea. I've done 3 of her patterns, including this one. I've done the Staffen Vest and the Tolsta Tank. They're all winners. They're fantastic. This is one of her, I think she calls them mega patterns. It includes 2 PDFs when you get the pattern. One of them is for the vest, and then one of them is for the cardigan and the sweater version. And for all of them, there are V-neck and round neck options. So it's like 6 different options in one pattern. It's really great. So I'm working off the PDF for the cardigan plus the sweater. It is a 31-page document. When I first started this project, I had to spend maybe an hour going through the 31-page document, highlighting all of the parts that I actually needed for what I'm making, crossing out the things that I didn't, because of course there's pages that are for the sweater and I don't need that. There's pages that are for the V-neck and I don't need that. Happy to have them and incredible that they're included. And one day I probably will make another one of those versions. So it's a great cost. But it was quite time consuming to do that. And what I ended up doing was deleting entire pages from the PDF. And now the PDF I'm working off of is like 15 pages. So lots of pages that have nothing I needed, which again is fine, happy for it, but I think you do need to know what you're getting into with those mega patterns. The other thing I wanted to mention about the pattern, and this might be a me issue, I was knitting late at night, so it could totally be a me issue. But I will say, this is the closest I have ever come to emailing a pattern designer for help. I've never done that. I'm sure that a lot of designers are like really, really helpful. But I usually just have this mentality of, I'm sure I can figure it out. This was my first time doing a sleeve cap. So there's a sleeve cap. This is considered like a baby drop shoulder. So the shoulder drops to probably about here, and then some shaping is needed for the sleeve, which is great. And there are short rows defined to get that shaping. You also do cables during the short rows, which is great, totally fine. The problem I had with the pattern was where it described when to stop doing the short rows. And I think my intuition was correct about where you should stop, but I just got so confused with the wording of where to stop the short rows. And I only mention that because I think at the end of the day, I worried about it more than I should have. Whether you do like, I'm going to make up some numbers here, 10 or for 15 short rows, I don't think it's actually going to make a huge difference with the sleeve. Mine turned out just fine, and I think that as long as you do the same thing for the second sleeve, it'll be okay. Only other thing I wanted to mention was needle size, which was interesting. I'm not a tight knitter, although I used to say I was a loose knitter, but that was before I started combination knitting. I think with combination knitting, it's a little bit tighter, but probably like average. This pattern though, really interesting gauge. It's listed as a DK weight gauge, but I do know that there are people who have made it with like pure Gynt plus a mohair or like other worsted/Aran weights. Also, the pattern was initially on a 3.25 millimeter needle, I believe. I had to size up to a 4.5 millimeter needle. And again, I don't knit that tight, so that was quite confusing, but I'm not mad about it because I think this is giving me like a nice airy fabric. Hasn't been blocked yet at all, but I think it'll be like nice and flowy, so I'm very happy with that. So again, just want to say, recommend the pattern. This is now my third Rebecca Clow pattern, and I love them. I think you just need to know when you're getting into those mega patterns, it is not brain off knitting, like at all. Okay, that is my last work in progress. I do want to do a little section at the end here about, I'm going to say acquisitions, but I actually don't have them yet. It's acquisitions/planning, just so that you kind of know what's to come on this channel, especially since, like I said, I'm almost a monogamous knitter. I don't have that many works in progress at the moment. Oh, I think you're gonna get to meet Maggie. Hi, Maggie. Okay, Maggie might come and join us. I only get to keep filming if she lets me. She is a dog, she runs this house. So for my planning, like I was saying, I'm almost a monogamous knitter. I also don't buy a lot of yarn. I don't have a big stash. So I've only got a couple projects going right now, and I'm waiting for the yarn for my next couple projects after that. I did put in an order from Knitting for Olive. I'm very excited about it. However, I was watching the tracking and it arrived in Canada and made it through customs on the same day that the Canada Post strike started. So I do not know when I'm going to get my yarn, and that has kind of slowed down my motivation to finish my current projects. So I ordered a sweater quantity of Knitting for Olive heavy merino in the color Marzipan, and that is going to be the Sandnes Garn Guernsey Genser. And actually, let me grab the pattern for that. So yeah, this is the Sandnes Garn Soft for Women, I believe it's called. I'm not going to attempt the Norwegian version of that name, but this is the Guernsey Genser, which I am going to do in the Marzipan colorway of Knitting for Olive, and I'm really excited about that. I'm looking forward to it being like an off-white. It's got those panels of texture, and they're like different texture from what I've seen before. Really excited about that. I think it was Inga from Knitting Traditions made the same one, and it looks amazing and cozy, and I think it'll be the perfect like late fall, early winter option if my yarn gets here. Okay, next thing I ordered was same yarn, Knitting for Olive heavy merino, but in the cream colorway. And okay, this is Maggie. She's going to join us for the rest of this to talk about our knitting plans. So the other yarn that I ordered is the same, Knitting for Olive heavy merino, but in the cream colorway. And for that one, I'm not 100% sure of a pattern yet, but I'm thinking the Serena sweater. And the idea of that is just like the perfect fall, almost like Rory Gilmore kind of cabled sweater. And yeah, I've been planning this one for a while. It was going to be my next cast on. We will see with the yarn getting here situation.